Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for our first edition, a very special edition, I'm so excited, a super exciting edition of Dominaria United Spoiler. So Dominaria United, the set I've been most looking forward to out of this entire year, doesn't release until the beginning of September. Spoilers don't start until the middle of August, so we still got a few weeks till spoiler season. But just a few minutes ago, Wizards gave us a stream and dumped a ton of information about the set. We got information, we got spoiler cards for standard, we got some commander stuff, we got so much to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking awesome, exciting, super hyped Dominaria United news. Before we do, a couple quick reminders. Number one, if you need some Magic cards, you can get them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Number two, if you need a playmat, head over to MTGGoldfishmerch.com. For a few more days, you can get our super sweet limited edition Commander playmat. And number three, to stay up on all the latest spoilers, make sure you head over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk Dominaria United. So let's start with some of the craziest news from this announcement. And I don't know if you remember when original Zendikar released in like 2010, Wizards did this secret promo where they took and put a bunch of old, super expensive Power 9 style cards, original dual lands, into booster packs. And people showed up at their pre-release and started like cracking their packs. And randomly people would open Black Lotuses and dual lands. It was really, really sweet. They called it Hidden Treasures.
Oh, Tropical Island, baby!
Treasure!
Yeah!
Wizards is doing something sort of like that for Dominaria United. Apparently, Wizard's story, and I don't know if I completely buy this story, but Wizard's story is they found a bunch of cases of original legends in a warehouse somewhere out in Washington State, and they went and got all these cases, and they opened them up, and they are inserting these original legends cards into collector's boosters for Dominaria United. So that means you can crack open a Dominaria United collector booster and potentially get a Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, like a $4,500 card. The Abyss, Chains of Mephistopheles, Moat, those are all over like $1,000, $1,500. So there's gonna be a ton of really expensive cards, which is amazing. It's like super, super exciting. Although I will say there is a little bit of criticism here, which it only is taking place in collector's boosters. So that means if you want to play the Legends Lotto, you're going to have to spend a decent amount on your collector booster boxes. When they did the original Hidden Treasures with Zendikar, those were just normal booster boxes. People just went and opened their pre-release packs and started getting these cards. So yes, you do got to buy the more expensive cards, but it's still a really interesting, really unique promo if you want to buy collector's boosters. Also worth mentioning, they're going to show up around 3% of the time in collector's boosters, which I think was the same rate as like the super etched foils or whatever they were called in Double Masters. It's like the special card rate, which means you'll get one of these every like 33, 34 collector boosters. So you're not going to get a ton of these, but it's still pretty sweet that you can crack open a Dominaria United pack and end up with a $4,500 Tabernacle of Pendrell Vale. So that was the big news, but there's also just a ton of Dominaria news, including a bunch of spoilers. So Dominaria spoiler number one. Jaya's coming back, and I can say pretty confidently that Jaya Fiery Negotiator is the best Jaya that we've ever seen. 4 mana, 4 loyalty, +1, make a 1/1 red monk creature token with prowess. -1, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them. You can play that card this turn, so some card advantage. -2, choose target creature an opponent controls. Whenever you attack this turn, Jaya Fiery Negotiator deals damage equal to that creature, equal to the number of attacking creatures. And then -8, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a red instant or sorcery, copy it twice. You can choose new targets for the copy. So Jaya Fiery Negotiator, this card is just really good. If you look at these abilities, the token it makes with the +1 is essentially a Monastery Mentor token, and we have seen 1/1s with prowess be really scary threats. Monastery Mentor is a premier finisher all the way back to vintage. You just sling a bunch of spells and the tokens get huge and you kill your opponent. Obviously, Jaya makes them a little slower than Monastery Mentor, but still, that's a really powerful effect. The -1, it's essentially a Magmatic Channeler activation, except you don't gotta discard a card, so it's a nice source of card advantage. Yeah, you can't cast both of the cards, You only get to choose one, but still, down ticking, you're going to find something good to cast. -2 gives you some dogpile style removal. The ultimate, you don't want to judge planeswalkers by their ultimate, but still, it probably wins the game. If you got a bunch of red spells in your deck, you just cast them and get a million copies of them and kill your opponent. So I gotta say, I think that Jaya Fiery Negotiator has a chance to be a very playable planeswalker for one really big reason. Well, actually, there's a couple of big reasons, but big reason number one is it's +1 makes a token. And if you look at playable planeswalkers at plus to make a token are traditionally very, very strong, because that means the planeswalker's really good at defending itself. Actually, the first thing I thought of when I saw Jaya was it kind of reminds me of OG Elspeth, where the +1 is just making this 1/1, the +1's making this 1/1, and it makes it really, really hard to actually kill the planeswalker because you have this consistent chump blocker. Plus, Jaya, just like Elspeth, starts with 4 loyalty for 4 mana, so if you uptick right away, it's going to go up to 5 loyalty, so that's a decent amount of loyalty as well. So I think we're starting off with a pretty good base for Jaya being playable. I would even argue that if you really want to squint and stretch, maybe this is red Jace. Obviously, the 4 abilities is what makes you think of that. I would say if the -1 was a 0 ability, I think we'd actually have a pretty good argument for Jaya being the red version of Jace. You got these 4 mana planeswalkers. They have 4 abilities. The +1's obviously different. Jace is controlling the top of your opponent's library. Jaya's making a token. But really, what both those things do is protect your planeswalker to some extent. Jace can get a removal spell, a threat off the top of the deck that your opponent would cast and attack the Jace. Jaya makes a token that can block. You have the next ability generating card advantage, then you have the removal ability, then you have the ultimate that wins the game. So the only thing that doesn't really line up is the fact that you got a -1 to generate the card advantage with Jaya, but I think this is a super strong planeswalker. The only thing I don't know about Jaya is where does it fit? Where does Jaya fit? There's a lot we don't know about Standard. We don't know the rest of what's coming in Dominaria. We don't really have a Spellslinger deck. Red is going to be changing a lot. Goldspan Dragon's going away, for example. Most of the red decks have been those decks are not going to be as popular. There's no expressive iteration. So the home for Jaya isn't very clear, but this combination of cost and loyalty and abilities makes me think that Jaya Fiery Negotiator not just is the best Jaya of all time, but probably a very, very strong planeswalker that could see a lot of play in Standard. We also got another red mythic in Shivan Devastator, which also has a promo version. I believe this is a buy a box promo, a game day promo. Don't quote me on that. Game day promo. I see it down there in the bottom. So this is a game day promo, but it also comes in the main set. So Shivan Devastator, red and X for a 0/0 Dragon Hydra, one of the sweetest creature types. It is flying in haste, and then when it enters the battlefield, it enters with X +1/+1 counters on it. So the bad news about Shivan Devastator is it's not efficient at any point on the curve. Like, you cast it for 2 mana, it's a 1/1 flying haste. You cast it for 3 mana, it's a 2/2 flying haste. You cast it for 5 mana, it's a 4/4 flying haste. You cast it for 10 mana, it's a 9/9 flying haste. So it never scales super well. The upside of Shivan Devastator is it's flying, so it's evasive. It has haste, so it's smashing your opponent right away. And it is like the ultimate mana sink. If you just got a lot of mana in the late game, it's very easy to dump it all in Shivan Devastator and just smash your opponent to death with one huge attack. This is going to be just an absurd top deck in the late game. So I think this card has a chance to be pretty good. It reminds me the most of Mistcutter Hydra. Mistcutter Hydra, I know this was many years ago now. Theros, almost a decade ago. It blows my mind that it was that long. But Mistcutter Hydra was a legit threat. Of course, it couldn't be countered, but it also had a downside that it's a ground creature, so it could be blocked, not by blue creatures, but by everything else. And this card saw a ton of play in Standard, where you just made a bunch of mana and you cast this and we're smashing people for 10 or 20 or some huge amount of damage. I think that Shivan Devastator can kind of do the same thing. Another comparison, kind of like Perforos's Intervention, except there's a huge upside here. A lot of these cards, Perforos's Intervention, for example, and we have some other versions of this, like Lightning Serpent, they give you a temporary creature. It's kind of like a ball lightning where you cast it and you get the token or you get the creature for 1 turn and then it goes away. Shivan Devastator doesn't just go away. You're getting this massive threat. If one attack doesn't kill your opponent, you just get to do it again. So I think that Shivan Devastator, even though it's not super efficient, can be a very good card. So in Standard, I think this is probably like a ramp style card. Like I said, it's not super efficient early in the game. A 2 mana 1/1, a 3 mana 2/2. Those aren't really exciting stats, but if you can make a bunch of mana, perhaps perhaps with treasure tokens, then this becomes absurd. You just cast this and you have an 8/8 flying haste or something and win the game in a couple of attacks, and we have a lot of treasure still, so maybe some sort of treasure style ramp deck can take advantage of it. If you go back to older formats, I could see like mono red devotion with Nykthos wanting this as a finisher. This is just one of the scariest things. If you can make a ton of mana, this could be a game-ending threat in one attack. Like if you get 21 mana, this is a 20/20 flying haster. Obviously that's a lot of mana, but some decks can do that. And then if you want to go maybe even jankier, and this might be a commander thing, maybe you're playing Ur-Dragon or whatever, or just some sort of +1/+1 counter deck, then Shivan Devastator can be even better because you can play stuff like Doubling Season. And when you're getting twice the number of counters on this, then this just becomes an absurd threat. Also worth mentioning, it's a Hydra, so along with having Dragon Tribal potential like an Ur-Dragon, this could certainly show up in some Gruul Hydra style commander decks. So Shivan Devastator, I really like this card. It's a very simple, elegant design, and yeah, it's not going to be efficient in the early game, but its combination of stats and abilities and being just an absurd mana sink makes me think it's got a chance to see a decent amount of play from standard back to commander potentially. Oh yeah, one other thing about this card that has nothing to do with its gameplay, its flavor text references Sheoldred, which is kind of a big deal. I was just having a debate on stream with some people about this, about whether Sheoldred would show up. We've been getting the Praetors. They've been returning. We got Vorinclex, we got Urabrask, we got Jin-Gitaxias, but there was a debate about Sheoldred. People thought that maybe Sheoldred wasn't even alive. There were rumors that it was dead. Some people said Sheoldred was dead. Other people said we just didn't really know. It was a cliffhanger what happened to Sheoldred. Well, it's pretty clearly referencing Sheoldred in the flavor text of Shivan Devastator, which I think bodes well for the potential of the Black Praetor making its return in the set. We also got an interesting one drop in a Valve Sleeper. So a Valve Sleeper, if you don't know anything about sleepers, this is kind of a Phyrexian reference. You can see the Phyrexian oil coming and taking over the Valve Sleeper. 1 mana, 1/1 human. You can pay a black mana, turn it into a human cleric that's a 2/2. You can pay 2 mana if it is already a cleric, put a death touch counter on it, and it becomes a Phyrexian human cleric. Phyrexians are back with base power and toughness of 3/3, and then once it's a Phyrexian, you pay 3 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you draw a card and lose a life. So if you think about this card, 1 mana, 1/1, not very exciting. You pay the 1, it is essentially a 2 mana 2/2. Also, basically a Grizzly Bear, not that exciting. Then you can pay 2 more, so it'll be 4 total mana, and you get a 3/3 with Death Touch. Hilltide Giant with Death Touch. I do gotta say, I love how this calls back to some of the iconic creature types of Magic's past, Grizzly Bears and Hill Giants. And then you can pay 3 mana and draw a card and turn it into a 4/4. Then you can do it again and make it a 5/5. Is a Valve Sleeper good? I gotta say, I'm skeptical. So this calls back to Figure of Destiny, one of the best one drops of its era. This was a legitimately scary, frightening card. The problem is, it's not 2008 anymore. It's 15 years in the future, and I'm just not sure a card like Figure of Destiny is good enough anymore. The problem with a card like a Valve Sleeper, even though it's not level up, so you can do this at instant speed, which is a big upside, but the problem is you're sinking all this mana into it, and it really doesn't get exciting until you're paying 3 mana to draw a card and put a counter on it. Even then, it's still kind of expensive, and there's a pretty big risk that you take and activate it a couple of times, and then you go to activate it and dump your mana into it, and your opponent's just like, kill it with a removal spell, and you kind of dumped all the mana into it for nothing. So I'm actually not really convinced that this is good. I do really love that last ability. Like, if you can get to the point where it's a Phyrexian and have a bunch of mana, just pay 3, draw a card, lose a life, put a counter on it, and be able to do that whenever you want, and grow your Valve Sleeper, I think is a pretty powerful effect. So we'll have to wait and see. I think this card definitely isn't going to show up in like modern humans or anything like that. It's just way too mana intensive, way too slow. On the other hand, in some sort of standard deck, after rotation, we're going to be in a small standard, maybe we'll have a chance for a Figure of Destiny style card to actually make an impact. Plus, I mean, worst case, it's really sweet to see Phyrexians making their return. We also got a callback to Llanowar with Llanowar Loamspeaker, a 2 mana 1/3 elf druid. You can tap it to add a mana of any color, or tap it to turn a land into a 3/3 elemental creature token with haste. Until end of turn, it's still a land, only do it as a sorcery. So you can't play it on defense, but you can use it on offense. So Llanowar Loamspeaker, It's like a Birds of Paradise. They cost 2 mana, but it also can tap to cast Animate Land, essentially. So I think that Llanowar Loamspeaker, it's a fine card. I will say I'm a little bit disappointed because I was thinking Wizards might pull all the stops in this set and actually put Llanowar Alva 1 mana mana dork in the set, which we haven't had in a while, just a straight up 1 mana mana dork. I think that seeing Llanowar Loamspeaker makes that less likely. Like, this is probably the big mana dork, but this is a very solid card. It's a mana dork that has high toughness, so it's fine on defense, and it can play offense without even attacking. You can tap it to turn a land into an elemental. Plus, the standard we're heading into is gonna need some good ramp creatures, like Prosperous Innkeeper, the biggest ramp creature in the format. It's rotating. Sculptor of Winter, a staple of mono green decks, that's also rotating. I think that Llanowar Loamspeaker is just immediately gonna slot into these spots. Like, there is a weakness here in decks that want to ramp. So if you're playing a ramp deck, if you're playing a mono green deck, I think that Llanowar Loamspeaker is just going to show up in your 2-drop slot, ramping you into your bigger threats, and being a very, very good option. Plays offense pretty well, plays defense pretty well, ramps into your big stuff. It's a really, really good 2-mana mana dork. We also got the return of Kicker with a twist. We haven't really seen this version of Kicker before on Temporal Firestorm. So 5 mana sorcery. It has Kicker of 1 and a white and or 1 or a blue. So this is almost like not exactly Kicker, not exactly multi-kicker, but like double Kicker. So you can pay either of those costs or both of those costs and kick it twice. It says choose up to X target planeswalkers or creatures you control, where X is the number of times this was kicked. Those permanents phase out, and then it deals 5 damage to each creature in each planeswalker. So essentially, you can cast this for 3 in a red, 5 damage to everything. You can cast it for 5 in a red plus 1 in a white or 1 in a blue, and you get to phase out a thing. You can cast it for 9 mana, including a white and a blue, and phase out 2 things, and then you get to deal 5 damage to everything regardless. So I think that Temporal Firestorm, I mean, it's just a good card. We've seen this rate, 5 damage to everything for 5 mana on Burn Down the House, on Hour of Devastation. Both of these cards are actually really similar. They're 5 damage to everything for 5 mana, plus they get an upside. You can make Devils or Things Lose Indestructible. Temporal Firestorm is kind of the same. Its upside is if you have extra mana, you can phase out some of your stuff and save it from the Wrath. Obviously, to kick it, it's going to be 7 mana or 9 mana, which is a lot of mana, but I think that's still a fine effect. So we'll see how it shakes out. We're still going to have Burn Down the House in Standard for a while. Is Temporal Firestorm going to be better, going to be worse? Probably depends on your deck, how likely you are to have stuff to phase out. If you don't have very many creatures in your deck, Burn Down the House might just be better because phasing out your stuff isn't going to be really relevant. But if you're playing some sort of creature deck that for some reason needs a sweeper, the ability to phase out one of your biggest things and keep it around and smash your opponent with it the next turn, that is a really nice upside. So you kind of get this slip out the back built into your Wrath effect. So I think that Temporal Firestorm, it seems solid enough. Mostly, I'm excited that Kicker is back with this new twist because Kicker is just such a great mechanic, and Wizards mentioned that this is going to be a cycle. So we haven't seen the rest of them. This is the only one we've seen so far. There's a chance that some of them are pretty good because Kicker is just a really sweet mechanic. So those are all the standard legal cards that we got so far. Full spoiler season starting August 18th. So we got like 3 weeks to go, 3.5 weeks to go till full spoiler season. But there's still a bit more news, and some of it is pretty exciting. So one of the other things we learned about this set is Dominaria United is going to have box toppers. And unlike the Legends cards we were talking about earlier, these are just normal box toppers. You can buy a draft booster box and you're going to get one of these. Plus they also show up in collector boosters. And these box toppers are updated versions of cards from original Legends. So these cards are not standard legal. These are more like Commander precon cards where they're legal in Commander. You can play them in Legacy and Vintage if you want to. So for example, Ramez Di Pietro, a pretty iconic old pirate with Phil Foglio art, except it's really bad. I mean, it's a 6 mana 3/4 with first strike. It's just not something you can really play these days. Even if you're playing Commander, it's just so underpowered compared to most of the Legends we have now that no one really plays it. Well, now we got a new version of Ramez, and Ramez Di Pietro the Pillager, a 4 mana 4/3. When it enters a battlefield, you lose 2 life and make 2 treasure tokens, and then one or more pirates you control deals combat damage to a player. Exile the top card of that player's library. You can cast that card for as long as it remains exile. That card's pretty pretty sweet. Obviously can't use it in standard, but that's a really nice upgrade for theft decks in Commander. It could be a nice uncommon commander for a theft deck or a pirate deck. Also seems good in pirate decks. Its ETB trigger means it's kind of only 2 mana. If you think about it in the context of Commander, in Commander, whenever you cast your commander and then it dies and you gotta cast it again, you gotta pay 2 for the command tax. This kind of helps pay for the command tax. You can use those treasures to essentially get a 2 mana discount, which is gonna help pay for the command tax as it adds up. Plus, throw Painter Monicon in the mix and it gets even crazier with the ETB trigger. So I think this is a really cool card. And I love the flavor of this. I love what Wizards trying to do. We got these crazy sets earlier in the year. We got to see like wild new Kamigawa. We got to see this gangster set in Streets of New Capenna. And now we're going into Magic's 30th anniversary. And Wizards is leaning hard on the nostalgia. We're getting Legends cards returning in new form. And it is so spectacular. We also got Torawaki coming back as Torawaki, the younger 5-mana 3/3 human archer with reach and lifelink, an interesting Anarachtos creature. If another source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent player, it deals that much damage +1 to a permanent player instead. And then when you cast an instant or a sorcery, 2 mana damage to any target. So this is also a pretty sweet uncommon commander. I gotta say, I've had some criticism of uncommon legends recently where they're just kind of boring, but these have been really interesting. You can play this as like a Rakdos Storm commander where you just play it and try to sling some spells and like burn people out of the game with a repeatable shock. You can use it to increase your damage. It's a callback to an iconic character. We also got the return of Jasmine Boreal. In Jasmine Boreal of the 7, a 3 mana 2/4 that taps in 2 mana, but you can only spend it to cast creature spells with no abilities. So vanilla creatures, and then creatures you control with no abilities can't be blocked by creatures with abilities. So this is a vanilla tribal commander. We've never had this before. This is a brand new thing, and this is on an uncommon. It's a box topper that you can get for free for getting a box. So I love these designs. I love the nostalgia of calling back to these old Legends characters that just don't really stand the test of time as far as gameplay because they were so underpowered, but are still pretty iconic in their own right, and seeing what they would look like 30 years into the future. Like, how good would Jasmine Boreal be? What would it do in 2022 Magic when we have so much more text and abilities and 30 years of design knowledge to put into it? So I'm super hyped for these. So there's 20 of these altogether. These are the only 3 we've seen so far, but they're coming as box toppers. I assume there's some pretty sweet higher rarity ones as well that we haven't seen so far, but super hyped for that too. We also got stained glass lands, and we also heard that these lands, the stained glass treatment, is going to carry over to other cards. We haven't seen any of the other cards, but the lands look pretty spectacular. I don't know, I have a hard time judging the lands these days because it seems like every single set there's some basic land that's full art and it just looks amazing and it's beautiful and it's super cool. So this is another one that it's full art, it looks amazing, it's super cool. How does it compare to the last ones that were super cool or the set before that that was also super cool? I don't know how to judge, but they look sweet, and I think I like the stained glass treatment. So we'll have to see what it looks like on non-land cards, but off to a good start as far as treatments. We also got finally a little bit of promo news. So these cards are obviously not legal in standard, but they're cards you're going to be able to get from going to your pre-releases and going to events at your local game store. So these are promos that are celebrating Magic's 30th anniversary, and they're going to be given out at pre-release events over the next couple of years. And these are the first batch, which is starting at the earliest days of Magic back in 1993, going to be going all the way up through the present, I assume. So if you go to your pre-release, there's a chance you get this sweet old border Sarah Angel or Ball Lightning or an old border German Fendhorn Elves. There's going to be a few of them that are printed in other language to celebrate those languages. So really, really cool promos, but really there's only one promo that matters, and that is they did it. They did something I've been asking for a couple of years now, which is bringing back textless promos. So this is the first place promo for store championship events, Omnath Locus of Creation, with no text at all. And I gotta say, this might be one of my favorite cards that Wizards has ever made. In the somewhat distant past, Wizards made textless cards pretty regularly, but then they kind of stopped doing it. They were hard for people to read. No one knew what they did. So there was some criticism there. But now we live in a world where are secret layers or putting all kinds of different art that are not really that readable into the Magic world. So I think at this point it's fine to do, especially in these rare cases, these textless cards. And I love that they picked Omnath Locus of Creation. It's a perfect choice. Probably the most iconic textless card is Cryptic Command, because Cryptic Command has a ton of text on it, a bunch of different modes. So if you play a textless one, there's a good chance your opponent's not going to know what's going on. Well, Omnath is about as close to that as you can get. This is the new Zendikar Omnath. This is the one that has a million different abilities. It was banned in Standard. So not only did Wizards print another textless promo, they printed it on a card with a ton of text. It's almost incomprehensible, which is so awesome. So I hope Wizards keeps doing this. Obviously, you only get it for winning your store championship, so I expect this to be pretty rare and also not something you're going to run into very often. So if you don't like textless promos, don't worry about it. There's going to be very few of these out there, but it looks really sweet, and I'm super excited that textless promos are making a comeback in Omnath Locus of the Creation when no words at all actually exist. So, anyway, that brings us to the end of our first daily dose of Dominaria United spoilers, and I know it's a lot of information, but what do you think? What do you think about the Legends card showing up in collector boosters? Is that something that's going to get you to splurge on a collector booster, even though they only show up in 3% of packs? What about the new cards? What about the box toppers, those sweet callbacks to the old Legends cards, the textless cards, the old pre-release promos? I'm so hyped for this set. Like, this is a set when Wizards announced the products for the year last fall and said, okay, Kamigawa, Streets of New Capenna, Dominaria United, Brothers War. This was a set, this and Brothers War, that I was like, I love the idea of Kamigawa. I'm intrigued by Streets of New Capenna, but I cannot wait for Dominaria. And I gotta say, now that we've got our first look at the set, I'm in love. It has exceeded my expectations. This set's going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome. It's going to have cool designs. It's going to have nostalgia. It is going to be everything you could want from a 30th anniversary Magic set. So let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back in a few weeks, I guess, with more Dominaria United spoilers. So until then, have a lovely night, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.